Now, this panel is going to be talking about making a case for digital transformation. You could argue that that's a pretty simple case to be made. Now, the future is digital, data is everywhere, meaning it's never been a better time to transform your business strategy. From AI and machine learning, data-driven decisions, globalized operations, and enhanced communication and security, digital transformation is obviously the new frontier. Our experts are going to discuss what digital transformation can mean for your business and the best methods out there for bringing your operations into the modern age. So I'm really pleased to welcome back some faces that we had on stage earlier today and also yesterday, and a new face to this week's show. Well, certainly on this stage. I'm pointing at you, Sheldon, actually.
Oh, okay.
You haven't been on this stage.
No,
you were on the procurement stage, sorry, the supply chain stage, though, I think.
No, not this time.
Well, we've got an exclusive then.
David spoke.
We've got you all
yesterday.
to ourselves. Of course,
The
David
first.
did, yeah. Okay, so just to reintroduce you to our panel. So we have Jim Townsend, who's the ex-CPO of Walgreens Boots Alliance. We have also Sue Spence, the Vice President, Sourcing, Procurement and Disbursements at FedEx. We have Sheldon Mydat, the founder and CEO of Suppeco. And we have Gary Levitan, Global Head of Procurement, Supply Chain and Contingent Labour at WeWork. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Thank you. Now, as ever, obviously, we've got some fantastic experts here to tell you what they think, but we'd really like to hear what you think as well. So please do ask any questions when we come round to the Q&A at the end. Don't be shy. There will be prizes for the best question, I guarantee. So, Sue, I'm going to start with you, actually. When people discuss procurement digitalisation, or digitisation, what methods are they actually talking about?
I think the methods they're talking about they're varied. The most traditional one for us anyway is, self-service, hands-off catalogs, ePro, for instance, for supplies. It could be the ERP system. I mentioned earlier, we're about to go live with Oracle Cloud Financials in the US, and it's everywhere. But also, I think about digitization in data capture and analysis, right? I talked about insight dashboards that we created so that people aren't literally culling through their emails to find their latest scorecard with a supplier or their category strategy. So I think it goes across the spectrum, both tactical and strategic, as well as supply risk management, which I spoke about earlier. Where do we go to find in one spot, 3 clicks and a button to get all the information we need to manage our category?
And as you said in your previous session, you talked a lot about the digital transformation that you oversaw and continue to oversee at FedEx. What are some of the benefits, the key benefits that can be gained through a digital transformation?
For us, it was two big things, not in this particular order, but time saving for the people. So they weren't literally sitting there, trying to go find and cleanse data, but also deeper insights and transparency. I have a favorite phrase, learning to see. We put some digital dashboards together to look at our behavior across all the operating companies for things like procurement of contract transportation. We're a transportation company. We also buy a lot of it, over $1 billion a year. And until we had it all laid out by month, by trend, by lane, by supplier, we didn't really see it because there's no way to see it on a spreadsheet. So great examples, great savings from that, and some surprises in how we behave at times.
Jim, same question to you. What are the key benefits to be gained?
Well, I think we've heard of quite a lot of them over the last couple of days, but some of the things which are kind of on my mind, I think the developing new insights through better data and using that information, be it to drive next wave P&L improvement, be it around creating new supply chain visibility, using those tools to kind of move the operating model. And Sue talked a little bit about this in her session earlier on, in terms of having seamless compliance and making the process of a compliant procurement activity almost kind of touchless and easy from a user experience perspective. I think also there's some fantastic opportunities there in terms of digital transformation around supply collaboration, and how you drive new value through working with suppliers and your business partners differently, and using that technology to drive innovation and what have you. So they're kind of some of them. Frankly, the list kind of goes on.
Yeah, I know. All right, let's change tack slightly here. So, Sheldon, why don't you help us understand the need for greater visibility and how that affects real-time spend?
So I'll give you an example. Without digital intervention, you are still working to largely a traditional governance regime. Bring in digital transformation, digital technology, you move away from the need to work with traditional processes, traditional regimes, cycles, hugely reducing time to action as well as time on task, both of which both of those areas are huge opportunities whilst using digital technology. And McKinsey, Jan's organization, did a study, and they came to the conclusion that digital platforms such as ours, no plugging during this panel, are responsible or can be responsible for driving as much as 3 to 10% incrementally on an annual basis by doing everything in real time. So it's actionable insights as a benefit, actionable insight, but actionable insight. So it's being able to see and it's being able to do in real time. Represents a huge savings, two very, very key KPIs.
And Gary, do you agree with that? Is that from your experience as well there?
Absolutely. I think one of the other less talked about benefits of that, of doing things quicker, more automation, is the user experience, as I talked about earlier, which increases adoption, which I know all of us to some extent, we want to get to that 100% compliance with our policies and our processes, and there's like a lot of intrinsic value there to increase that. But digitization, making it quicker, easier to use, more transparent, one of the end results is that you're going to increase adoption. People are going to want to use your platforms and your systems, and that really maximizes how much impact we could have.
And do you think that's an expectation that consumers have now? You know, we talk about instant gratification and things like that. So they're actually driving this as well?
Consumers without question. But internally, internal users, I mean, most of our workforces they're getting younger, they're not getting older. And again, like I said earlier, everybody's used to a certain level of transparency, a certain elegance to getting things done, whether it's on their phone, tablet, or computer, or in virtual reality, the metaverse. So just really providing them that kind of experience internally as well. It increases adoption.
Okay, now we're talking here about the needs or the benefits of a digital transformation. Why does a lack of technological advancement in procurement stunt the ability to mitigate risk and ensure continuity? And I'm going to throw that out there. I don't know who wants to take that, but why does that happen? Why does a lack of technical advancement, why does it hold back procurement?
So, if I may, so procurement, if you look at the history to start with, procurement has historically been seen as a support function. Supply chain has been historically seen as an overhead. Both, therefore, poorly invested. Any overhead is seen as something where costs need to be cut down, so naturally won't be heavily invested. So without investing in the technology, I mean, you look at the procurement landscape, it's a plethora of S2P software because it's answered the market, which is spend-driven. So that doesn't lend itself to all of the other facets of digital transformation. So, for example, you look at digital transformation. What is digital transformation for an organization? It's not just procurement, it's technology intervening in every one of its company departments. That's true transformation, and that's the company. And then you look at the fact that revenue for most companies is up to 70% related to their supply chain. So suddenly that transformation doesn't just look at the company itself, it looks at its relationships with all of its suppliers. So there are so many different permutations and blockers, barriers, and old attitudes in terms of support functions and overheads and which act as barriers to transformation. And then you've the behaviours. Then you've got different drivers, as you've alluded to, and instant gratification. Another quick example, and I'll stop. So we are a digital transformation platform, but yet we've got business cards sitting on the desk. And without fail, every single person I've spoken to over the last 2 days, we've gone through great discussions and exploring things, and then I've given them a card, or they've asked for a card, because we like doing things the old-fashioned way as well. And this is what we're up against. People won't necessarily do what's slick and digital because it's slick and digital. They'll go for the business card. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, this ties back to your talk earlier where you're talking about the BOBOs as well, right?
Bobo.
BOBO.
Back office.
Just better explain that for anyone who wasn't in that
The
session.
BOBO is the back office of the back office, which means it's not strategic, not thought of as a competitive advantage, and not where you want to be. And we've transformed from that once we showed a lot through digital, the power of data and what it shows, especially when the data and the facts show what our behavior has been versus what the stories are. You've heard of emotional sourcing. It's good for your shoes, your watch. Don't bring it to work, right? So, just building on what Shell said, especially with regard to supplier risk, and especially the tier 2 and 3, you don't know what's there. You don't know what you don't know. I'm full of these phrases today, but you're never going to read enough online articles or papers or anything else to be able to absorb everything you should know about your supply. It's impossible, right? So as the digital world can push things based on, here's my suppliers, here's my key risks, here's the, economic, social, political things I want to have pushed to me. I get every morning 2 or 3 articles that's got one of my key suppliers in them along one of those pillars, and it's 30 seconds to read it and know if I should be picking up the phone and talking to the CFO of that company or just saying, okay, that's one I don't have to worry about. I never did that before. I would get surprised. I would get a call by the CPO in my old job to say, Ms. Spence, your supplier just declared bankruptcy, and that was a bad day. Right? You don't want to find your news out that way. So.
I've got a I was just kind of reflecting on that discussion. I've had this conversation with a number of CPOs over the last couple of years, and kind of a reflection on what happened during COVID. And you might want to substitute that with the Ukraine crisis and several other things. If we're all honest, most CPOs and procurement leadership teams would say that none of their risk management tools helped them spot that risk before it happened. Nobody was, or very few companies, I suspect, were planning out the risk of Putin invading the Ukraine 6 months before it happened. 2 days before the kind of lockdown was announced, people start to think about COVID. Hey, look, this is going to happen. The first time as CPO for Walgreens Boots Alliance, it kind of hit me between the eyes that, hey, look, this is real, we've got something coming, is when a product which would never ever land on anybody's risk register, known as Clorox wipes, which you'll know, Sue, for disinfecting wipes, were unavailable. And we needed to clean all of our pharmacies, and we needed to find an alternate. We need to go out and source some isopropyl, which most people didn't know what it was at that point. So I guess my point is that we spent all this time refining risk registers, BCPs, and investing in some tools. But when it came to the crunch moment, it didn't work, right? And I'm reminded of, you guys will correct me on this, and I think it was Eisenhower that said something like, the process of planning for a battle is indispensable, but the plans are dispensable within the first 24 hours or something like that. So I think there's something here which says, actually having that mindset which says this is how we create BCPs, this is how we manage risk. And I think probably most organizations within 5, 10, 20, 30 days started to use the technology and the kind of new insights that we're getting to actually actively address what they'd understood during those first few weeks of the pandemic. So I think we've got to be careful here. There's no kind of silver bullet on this. I think it requires a degree of intuition and knowledge coupled with working with the tools. So I think clearly the world's moving much quicker and we've got to get much better at this, and the technology is really going to help us. But really, when you reflect on it, if we're critical of us as a society and as a community, all of the signals were there with COVID, but we just didn't believe it was possible. And we chose to ignore that. The tools didn't help us get ready for it, but the tools absolutely helped us recover from it more quickly than they would have done if those tools hadn't been around. Well, that's my viewpoint. I don't know what everybody else feels.
I would agree. One thing that we reconvened, FedEx has something called the North Star team. So we will ship aid in disasters. We obviously ship vaccines. We had a ready-made team for hurricane, fire season, humanitarian aid. And by day 30, when the people hadn't slept for a month and we're trying to get, personal protective equipment for 500,000 employees so we could fly Jim's Clorox wipes because he's a big customer, right? And oh, by the way, protect the pilots who can kick anyone out of the cockpit if they don't feel it's safe. What my team said is it's just the disaster recovery process on steroids. And so the base function was there, but what we weren't ready for was shortages on these like commodity items that nobody ever cared about. But that same process worked, and we had just gone through a peak planning exercise, and the following year, right, when the South froze over and de-ice fluid became a commodity you couldn't get, we're 5 degrees away from grounding the fleet, we used the same process again. But if the supply's not there, it's just not there. The key is, like you said, is how do you spot what's about to happen? And I think it's more about, well, you can't, but if you're really, really good at resiliency and recovering, then you'll recover quicker. We just need to survive it. Tell my team, you're not gonna stop the disaster, but if you can recover quickly from it, then you're in business, right?
So Jim, you actually brought up a really interesting point where, we focus on technology a little too much to try to solve the difficult to solve problems like assessing risk, which is most likely impossible to solve, especially when things like this are happening in rapid succession. But, one of the advantages of digitalization is solving the problems that we know we can with automation, with transparency, with software that will really allow us to find other ways to be prepared for things that we're never going to be able to predict. With the COVID supply chain disruptions, or with what energy prices are doing because of the Ukraine war, there is no platform that would have predicted that, but we should be focusing on things like supplier redundancy, resiliency, so that there are backups, so that there are alternatives. Those are the things that we just, without automation in the other parts of our program and our organization, will never really be able to focus on those things. And some of those, although we weren't predicting this, could have helped us solve and mitigate some of these issues that are a result of it.
Yeah, and do you think that's something that has changed now? So do you think people are looking harder at their supply chains and looking where those potential weaknesses are? Classic example is semiconductors, right, and Taiwan. Now, obviously, people are trying to address that, but that takes time. So do you think we have maybe learnt a valuable lesson there when it comes to procurement and supply chain in terms of looking at those real hotspots and trying to do something about it before it becomes a problem?
I think we're learning to. I still think there's, we probably need a few more catastrophes like that for it to really sink in, the rest of the executive teams and our boards and everything. But I think we're getting there. I think we are, a lot of the peers I'm talking to are more focused on resiliency and redundancy. And I worry that we still might be falling into this trap of trying to find that silver bullet or that tool that's going to just completely protect us and predict it. And And I'm sure there'll be a lot more products out there that are going to promise that as a result. You know, the opportunity is certainly there. I just worry about falling into that trap. And, you know, like, I would prefer to solve the things we know we can solve with technology and just really focusing on how to protect ourselves when the unpredictable things happen so that we have multiple alternative plans on how to get the things that we need.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you say it like that, it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, so obvious.
It's so simple. Okay, well, look, you can tell by the audience here that we've got today as well, you know, people of, you know, differing ages. How do they adapt to new technology? Maybe Sheldon, you can take this one. So how do you ensure a high adoption rate of technology when you've got employees of a certain vintage, like myself, let's say, and maybe someone who's, you know, like, you know, fresh graduate or whatever, that might be more tech savvy than me? Hard to believe, I know.
Very well stated.
Thank you. Might be more
Not
tech
offensive
savvy
at all.
than me.
No, perfect.
So how do you get that adoption across those generations?
So the first thing is we don't build technology that looks like spreadsheets because nobody wants to use them. I'm not suggesting that Excel spreadsheets they'll never go away. We will always use them.
I won't.
Say that now.
Yeah.
They'll never disappear completely. But anyway, we don't build software that's like taking a spreadsheet and putting it onto a platform. We make something that's aesthetically pleasing. You don't try and implement technology top-down across an organization that's sometimes very poorly integrated as well, depending on some sectors, they typically grow through acquisition, and yet because of maybe security paranoia, they don't integrate systems, and they stay poorly integrated. So if you try and implement technology top-down, it fails every time because one won't agree with the other, one won't share their toys with the other, etc. You've also got people that aren't good with technology, as you say. So you've got to make things easy. You've got to run teach-ins. We run teach-ins on a regular basis for our customers' suppliers. We ran one just last week for a television company for a number of their suppliers, just to show them how to use basic functionality on the platform. And you do this on an ongoing basis. You start small. And you go with a process of osmosis if you want something to adopt properly and take hold. Otherwise, it will fail. You will get remorse at getting people to do things that they don't want to do because nobody likes change. You know, that business card example is maybe a silly example, but it's true. And people like to use, as much as they complain about spreadsheets, they still like using them, don't they? They do. The only thing is you can't run today's operations with spreadsheets. So you need to break through these barriers. Just a quick example, we're doing some work for one of the banks for the wholesale operation. And so you've got parts of the operation that are, and this is run by the CIO office to increase resiliency across the bank, across the strategic suppliers. So we're looking at the operation and we're seeing that some operations wake up whilst other parts of the operation are going to sleep because it's global. You've got different languages. You've got distributed teams and remote workers and digital suppliers that are far ahead of the game, far further ahead of the game than the bank itself. And you've got the bank trying to operate these relationships with spreadsheets. It's a non-starter, an absolute non-starter. So it's a teaching, it's a program of teaching, it's a program of slow osmosis, to be honest with you, even for the bigger organizations who are often just as quite mature in some of these processes.
Yeah, look, I think we can all celebrate anything that moves us away from Excel and spreadsheets. Jim, how does digitization help businesses create better partnerships with their suppliers and clients? A bit like Sheldon was alluding to there as well. So how can that help forge those partnerships and what benefit is there to businesses?
Yeah, and I think those kind of partnerships kind of are internal and external, shall we say. You know, I think, you know, when one looks at procurement, you know, maybe 20 years ago, maybe even further back than that, procurement's role was in a smaller box. Now it's in a much larger box, which comes with a a significant challenge because of the role of the buyer is much greater and more complex, and they've got all these great tools, which is fantastic because we're able to add value in a different way. But I think from an internal perspective, I think the value that procurement add and the clarity of their role is much greater because they're now able to contribute on a multifaceted level. You know, in the past, they were a strat sourcing house, or they were a cost-driven function, or whatever, or a PO cutting function, or whatever the model was in that organisation. I think now and in the future, we're going to see a much wider role for procurement. Technology plays a huge role in that. And I think the internal client will get that in a way that they perhaps struggled to understand in the past as a result of it. I think also from a supply perspective, I think it gives a new opportunity to interact with suppliers differently. And, you know, Sue, you spoke earlier on today about, I think you said 100 suppliers or 50 kind of key suppliers. I can't remember the number exactly. Because you can only, you know, I come from an organization previously where, you know, we've got a business in 30 different countries. We've got tens of thousands of suppliers, hugely localized supply chains, and for good reason. That's kind of the way they're structured. You can't focus on all of those suppliers. You've got to be really careful about who you focus with, or who you focus on, how you collaborate with them. And even focusing on 50 or 100 for a large company is very, very difficult. And driving real value-adding collaboration using technology and following through and executing on that collaboration is much, much easier with the support of the tech. You know, so that opportunity to innovate, develop new product designs, address top-line and bottom-line opportunities, and be able to track and trace that, potentially with a larger number of companies than you can do today manually, is really clear. And I do think, I'm sure we've all suffered this at some point, we've all kicked off supplier collaboration sessions, and you know what tends to happen in many large organizations, you kick them off and they start with a land of promise, and then if you're not careful, they kind of wither out after a few months as people kind of lose interest and lose passion for it. So I think, you know, whereas in actual fact it should be a continual conversation rather than a party that, you know, one that starts off with a big party and fanfare. And I think these tools are great. Some of the tools I've seen are absolutely fantastic for that.
Okay, Sue, I want to come back to you again here. This is something, again, that you mentioned in your earlier presentation. And this is about digitization and how it creates time for higher value-adding tasks. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can just share some of the insight that you had in terms of how you implemented that and the benefit that you gained from being able to free up the time of those workers.
So the example I'll give will be ironic because the thing we needed to make time for isn't very digital either, and that was category management, category strategies. So my sourcing and procurement team, procurement being more tactical, the way they were managing without automation, without bots, right, without robotic process automation, they just had no time. And I really forced the issue by saying, okay, and on top of all of that, we're going to give you an outline and guidelines for what a good category strategy looks like. And over time, we're going to fill it out, and everyone's going to, you know, have a dress rehearsal with Sue before we're ready for prime time. They couldn't do all the work. So the fence sitters, as I like to call them, you know, I don't think you should work 12 hours a day. I don't think that's mentally healthy for you. It's not good for your family. So you might want to let go of this very tactical thing that you're doing and try out the technology, right? Otherwise, you know, this other work is not going away. So that was maybe a little backhanded, but we had an imperative to go develop that category strategy. Most of the team that ended up staying and progressing with us adopted quickly. And then we had some folks that were just nervous about it and didn't want to do it any other way. And okay, but it's not a vote. So now those category strategies, which I love, they're not digital at all. They're PowerPoints. They're 65 pages. It's a glorious thing. A lot of the input that goes into it comes from a digital source, but we've got another level to do now. You know, so we built, on my slide, we talked about turning from red and yellow to green with the characteristics of world-class procurement. we built point solutions all over the place. There's nothing knitting them together on the strategic sourcing side. That's the next thing to do. So I want workflow for everything. And when a new person comes in, you know, he doesn't have to wonder. It's literally scripted, not that everything can be. So we have another level to go to. I think we need another technology map. We're working on that. And as you guys said earlier, the general solutions aren't specific enough, and they're not a best of breed, but it's general. We also have a rule for good reason. We don't do customizations in a big way because they're very expensive, and then everyone's doing their own thing. So not everything fits, but we have to kind of walk that line between something that's general enough for everything without standardization, but then how do you pop those best-in-class tools in and still have it flow on a platform?
It's interesting. You talked a bit about your, when you talked about your, you didn't kind of go into the tools behind it, how you have your scorecard. And I think a lot of companies, I don't know, the last company I was at, we use Power BI. So instead of having an army of analysts kind of doing this every month, we just kind of plugged into our Microsoft tool set that we'd already got available at our hands. Took them a couple of weeks to kind of build this out, or a few weeks to build this out. And wow, it's fantastic. And it just removes that the drudgery of the analyst day job in just being the best spreadsheet jockey you possibly can.
Yeah. That the spreadsheet I'll stick up for them, and here's why. And my 91-year-old mother is using one too, so that's cool. What's this spreadsheet thing? We had people talking, and I will maintain putting off doing anything by saying, well, we have to go study the market. You know what? Put it on a flipping spreadsheet. Get started. You know, Rome is burning here. And I want to take that excuse away. Okay, and so and I was taught that way. I have a career in continuous improvement, 6 years of my former job, and our senseis, the guys that started Toyota Production System, they forbid us to even have our laptops. You wrote everything out on a piece of paper, and their point was understand the process and the flow first, digitize it later. And that's just what we adopt. Now it's time, and we've gotten far. We're not far enough along, but that's what we're going to go and do next.
Okay, I want to bring this back to the theme of the discussion, which is making a case for digital transformation, as it says. So Gary, actually, why don't you can you tell us how digital transformation improved operations within your business?
Sure. So I'm going to oversimplify. I like doing that. This doesn't just go for a procurement organization. Quite frankly, any business unit in any company, I'm sure there are some exceptions, but for the most part, doesn't want to be exclusively reactive. Right? That's a margin killer. That's a profitability killer. You want to be as proactive and strategic as possible. Buzzwords, but it's true. If you're always reacting, always adjusting, you're not thinking things through, you're leaving value and profitability on the table, any organization. And that's the business case. You know, the reactive tasks are easier to automate. They're easier to have transparency on. Those are the ones that we know, as I mentioned earlier, we can solve with technology. Leaving the proactive work for human beings. I mean, maybe AI one day, we'll see, but it's able to transform how you do business, how you solve problems, how you have medium and long range plans, how you see the future, how you can predict profitability, revenue, expense, by just shifting that really further into the strategic and proactive territory. And there are real quantifiable numbers that you could attribute to that, not just in workload and volume, number of transactions, but right from the P&L. And I think that's really ultimately what we want to do. We want to have teams of bright individuals who are planning for the future, adding contingencies, adding redundancies, and just so that when things do happen, we're prepared. And the more you shift it, you shift the actual day-to-day work towards that, the more I think profitability follows very closely.
That's a really good point. Sheldon, I want to come to you here as well. We said earlier that technology did not help to or could not have predicted what we've seen in the last couple of years, but obviously it's helped us to emerge, if you like, and recover quicker. Is that how you see technology? Because obviously you're in the business of technology. Is that how you see it? Do you think we will get to a stage where the technology can predict these incidents to a higher degree?
I think I'm just going to start by saying I completely agree with what Gary just said in terms of margin killers and reacting and reworking. Clearly margin killers, but that's leading into your question, segueing in, which is taking a more traditional business or pre-COVID business model, let's say, at which point, I don't know how many contracts were written up because the view was, well, we're not looking for contingency, we need to rebaseline. This is a new way of working. When we first started saying new ways of working and new norm and all that kind of stuff. So I think there are already smart technologies that are reshaping S2P software in terms of AI, predictive analytics, et cetera, in the sourcing space. There is digital twin technology based on predictions, et cetera. You put the data in, it scenario tests for you. So I mean that already exists. But as Jim said, there is no silver bullet. There's no crystal ball really, because no matter what we do, we're going to get blindsided by something, another war. I don't know, but you just can't really rely on a crystal ball. There's no such thing. But you can. I think the real case now is to learn how to roll with the turbulence. It's that's the new norm, rolling with the turbulence. Because we've seen the pandemic, we've seen this endless flow of disruption that seems to have been kicked off by Suez. Actually, that seemed to be the start of it all, didn't it? It was COVID, and then it was the Suez Canal blockage, and from then on, everything just went wrong, and hasn't stopped seamlessly. And we've now got ourselves into a position where we need to rewrite the book and create a model that says we need to rework and kind of reposition ourselves on a regular basis. And there's only so much you can do to kind of avoid things happening, because they're going to happen anyway. It's just a case of how you deal with them, how you get up afterward. That's true resilience. It's not avoiding. It's recovering.
Yeah. True.
So yeah.
Can I just say, just as we were talking there, something kind of struck me, and I don't think we've really kind of covered it here, but as procurement leaders, we need to stop asking for forgiveness when we ask for an investment. It's almost as if we put out a cap there and, please, we're just procurement. Do you mind if you help invest in our function? We've got to stop all that crap, if you pardon me, and we've got to get on with realizing that supply chain digitization is largely underinvested. And as leaders, it is our job, your job, to make the case for that change. And I think, moreover, you've got to get to a point where you don't tire out the organization through what I would describe as death by 1,000 cuts, which is kind of going in with piecemeal here, there, and everywhere else. As leaders, I think it's incumbent on us to build a picture of where you're heading in the next 3 to 5 years, and you take the organization through that picture in terms of that technology picture, in terms of this is the capability we're going to get, this is our return on investment, this is what mitigates risk, this is what makes it a better place to work, and this is why it supports our diversity and sustainability goals. And you need to package all that up, you need to talk through the kind of key elements of the investment you're going to make, and it actually makes it much easier to sell the story when you look at it as a whole, rather than, why do you want this little piece of geeky software that only procurement could possibly understand what they're talking about? Because nobody's interested in that. Nobody cares. What they're interested in, where you're heading, what it's going to cost, what the return's going to be, and all those other factors. So my plea would be, think big, be bold, use that reputation that you've built, and tell that story as a whole and talk about it as a package and make that case and tell that whole story. And please don't go in on it piecemeal, because I think, you know, nobody will understand it and nobody's interested in general. Sorry, forgive me, I kind of went off script there.
No, that was really good. Carry on, please.
Oh, I'm out of energy now.
And the cost of doing nothing. You know, we got the same kind of thing when we talked about supplier risk, and we actually didn't go ask for funding. We did what we could with what we had, knitted something together, and it was so much better than what we had, which was a goose egg.
Yeah.
But we started talking about, this is before the big cyber attack that cost FedEx hundreds of millions of dollars, and Maersk and Merck, right?
Yeah.
Not Petya. Here is what we see happening if we don't do this. And so we try to make it imperative that the cost of doing nothing is bigger than the cost of whatever we're asking for.
That's a really good point. And coming back to what you said, Jim, as well, is do you think that the procurement in general is held back by that reluctance to spend money? Because they still see that as, you know, their raison d'etre, if you like, is to save money.
I think in part, I think there's often a confidence issue in some procurement organisations which says, you know, the wider organisation doesn't get what we do, and when we go and ask for investment, they don't understand us. And I think unless you paint that big picture about what you're going to become, they'll never understand you, and that's your job as leaders to kind of paint that pitch, frankly. You know, because nobody else is going to do it for you, and if you don't do it now, in 5 years' time, you'll have the same landscape you have today.
And I also think part of the problem is the reason we're always asking for forgiveness is there is this at least decades-old perception that we're there to save money. We're not there to save money. We're there to make the business profitable. We're a P&L function. Without us, there is less margin. That's why I keep saying when I talk about this at WeWork, I don't talk about saving money. I talk about the P&L. I talk about margins, profitability, exactly what our CEO talks about, exactly what our board, our investors want to know. And that's our function. I think we have fallen into this trap where we're talking about savings. And it's true. How do you ask to spend when your job is to save?
Yeah. Next level P&L improvement, when you've picked up all that low-hanging fruit, is likely going to come from technology and doing things differently. And you've got to figure out what's your plan and your strategy around that, because it's not something you're going to be able to turn on overnight. So you've got to have that longer-term plan to be able to make that investment and kind of get that buy-in at the exec level.
Okay, look, I'm really hoping we've got some questions from the floor here. Anyone? Yes, got a hand up here. Could we get the microphone across, please? If there's anyone else with a question as well, maybe put your hand up now so that we know. Thank you. Just put your hand up again, please, sir. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi there, James Mead from procurementsoftware.site. I made a few notes during the presentation, would just like to ask each of you as panelists, and Jim, to your comments, I mean, the last couple of comments, you obviously get it. Why are we still struggling, given that the business case is so obvious, why are we still struggling to get the investment? I mean, there are three things that I noted down. Is it that there are too many technocrats and not enough visionaries in top procurement positions? Is it just bad experiences of some of the legacy brands in the source-to-pay suite? I won't name them, but the three-letter acronym and the Spanish word for up springs to mind. Or is it just, to your point, Jim, we're just not making a convincing argument, or there's apathy from the economic buyer, who is in most cases, I guess, the CFO. You know, procurement are dreadful marketers, aren't we? I think it's a known problem. So could I ask each of you just for a quick 10, 15-second answer, which one is it?
You want to go first?
Sure, I'll start. I mean, I think it's all of the above, but I'll pick one. Because of the lack of prior digitalization, because in general, automation and technology within the procurement industry is a little bit behind many other critical functions within companies. There is kind of a lack of transparency. It's difficult to actually quantify with transparency what the return is. It's easy to talk about it. It's easy to prove it in the end, but it's difficult to create a pro forma without that kind of transparency. So using technology and automation to just really translate into simple arithmetic, because a lot of the things that we're asking for will result in a simple arithmetic formula for either savings or value add. Just getting to that quantifiable piece on a pro forma will make it a lot easier. And the lack of that, which we still, I feel like we do have, makes it difficult.
Okay, Sheldon, 20 seconds.
Sure. Procurement largely still reports into finance. That's the problem. It's always going to be about the numbers. Purist procurement has always been about the numbers. It needs to be more about the value imperative. So it's exploring the top line value. And we can start talking about all the different cliches around collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. But that is where that value lives. And that's the game changer. Take it away from finance. Give it its own seat at the table independently.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified. My procurement function in my old company was always operations. This one's in finance. It's so much better because they have a longer view. However, it's not as good as going direct. For me, I think it's about not being able to articulate the business case. You know, right now we're trying to speed up how long it takes us to do our major deals. The quickest that we've done it in is 5 months from start to finish. And that was with perfect stakeholder alignment, no BS. We thought that was lightning quick, and it was still too slow for our leaders, and I get it. The longest one takes 2 years. So if we can speed up our processes with technology and do more projects, then that is going to pay for itself very quickly.
Very briefly, I think there's a few things. I think, and all the technology companies, and you may not agree with me on this, but the technology market for procurement is massively fragmented, and it's kind of very quickly evolving. At some point in the future, it will come together in some shape or form, I suspect. That actually makes the architecture and plugging it all together actually quite complex. So I think at some point, you have to figure out how to tell that story about, you know, what it is you're building and how it all fits together. I think it's being gutsy, as I said earlier. I think it's about being able to tell that compelling story. It's about being able to demonstrate the absolute return that you're going to create by doing whatever it is you're going to do. And, you know, having the centrality and the influence within the organization to kind of to get that buy-in alignment.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. We're not going to come to you for your question, I'm afraid, because I've got a couple of questions here I want to address. I'm really sorry, but we're running out of time, but thank you anyway. There's one question here. We've got lots of questions that have come in. We don't have time to address them. But could you all give me one key takeaway for the audience? I'm going to come to you first, Gary. So when it comes to making a case for digital transformation, what's your one takeaway for the audience?
Speed and usability. Speed and usability increases the business case and adoption and compliance.
Okay, love that. Sheldon?
Frictionless access and actionable insights.
That's a nice line. You've been practicing that one.
He ran it all together.
Sue?
Return on investment, defining it.
And Jim?
Talk the language of business, not the language of procurement.
Okay, well, I hope that answers a lot of your questions. It's been a great panel. Thank you so much to Jim, Sue, Sheldon, and Gary. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody.